Okay, I'm going to get started. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Today I'm talking about my 4 human subsystems model. I did a presentation on this about a week ago, exactly a week ago, and I got some amazing feedback. So I'm using all that feedback today. The gist of the feedback was, how do you actually apply this? So what? What does this mean? How do you apply to, the biggest thing that I got from, my own conclusion was I need to show how it applies in human interaction. So that's one angle I'm putting in. Barry talked about quantification, so I'm going to bring in quantification. So it's all about application. So what I've done is that I'm going to apply to 4 different areas. And I'm going to go through this entire, these 4 areas. So let me show you the table of contents. Yeah, this is the table of contents. So first I'm going to apply to you. I'm going to apply to an individual. And each of these things, I'm going to do it in 2 phases. I'm going to use it, how you can use it for assessment, where you are, and growth strategies for these 2 things. I strongly recommend using pen and paper to both draw, to keep track of all the thoughts that you have. I want to make this very interactive. I want to actually listen to all your questions and answer them. So I'm going to go through, first I'm going to apply to these 4 areas. Yourself. Second, interaction with others. Third, interaction between you and the systems you live in. So whether it is a family you live in, or a business you work in, or a culture you live in, or the global civilization as such. Fourth, I'm going to look at the role of integrating principles, and I'm going to illustrate it using my favorite principle, form follows function. This principles kind of hold these things together as a way of integrating these systems. And finally, fifth, I'm going to talk about 3 simplified versions of this framework, which may be particularly useful. So I'm going to come at it from multiple angles, because what I found is that people are different, and some things resonate better with some people and some things don't. So I'm coming at it through multiple ways. Hopefully, some of them speak to you. And so please let me know, what you get from each of these things. There's going to be plenty of time for asking questions. And then we're going to do breakout rooms as usual. And then you get to come back and tell me what you're walking away with and any kind of final questions. Okay. So that's the plan. So let me jump in here. So first, let's talk about ourselves. Actually, let me go back and let me give you a quick overview for those who are not familiar with this. Okay. So what I'm saying is that there are 4 functions that we have, which are very different from each other. 2 of them are external functions, 2 of them are internal functions. They developed over time. So we are beings of action. So kind of habitual bodily actions, the red color is what I mean. And here, body, I mean literally body. So for example, your clothes are not part of your body. You're just your body. Actions of that body. Everything else that we use is part of the external civilization structures. Okay, so those are the 2 things. So you have to actually move. You have to actually do things. So that's the bodily actions. Internally, in the evolutionary stage, we have a brain which is very intuitive, reactive, which is able to see patterns and respond to that. And I'm calling it the subjective, intuitive reactions. I'm using 3 different words. Hopefully one of them resonates with you. They are all trying to talk about the same thing. So that's the yellow color. The colors, by the way, I have borrowed from Carl Jung's colors for these functions. Externally, so these two, the yellow and red, are our evolutionary heritage. They're focused on the local context. They are focused on your body and your internal sense of things, your feelings, your intuitions, your automated mechanisms, what Daniel Kahneman would call system one. In the evolutionary context, on the African savannas, we'd be using mostly these two things to get around. The other two, the green and the blue, are relatively recent. Those are post-writing, post-civilization. On the external level, it's not just us and people we are close to that we are interacting with. We are interacting with a city. We are having economic relations. We are participating in large economics, social, political structures. These I call kind of external civilization structures. And they're giving you constant feedback from your actions. And then you have a faculty inside, which is a deliberative faculty, which Daniel Kahneman calls slow thinking. This is our ability to reason, deliberate, check objective information as opposed to subjective reactions. So those are the four functions that I think capture what we can do. And the thing in the center is a system that kind of brings these things together. It's a way of using these things together. So this includes things like purpose, planning, principles, things that integrate how these four functions work together. Okay, so that's the basic model. So I'm going to go ahead and start applying it to four things. First, yourself. Second, human interactions. Third, um, you and systems that surround you. And fourth, I'm going to talk about use of principles. Okay, and then I'm going to talk about three ways of kind of simplifying this structure. Okay, so let me go to yourself. So for each of these things, first I'm going to talk about how you can use this for assessment, where you are, and then growth strategies. Now, what I found, and this is actually very, common knowledge in field of psychology, that people have different strengths on this. There are some people whose intuition and feeling, that's the yellow part. Do you see my mouse when I move it? Okay, so this yellow part over here, that's the intuitive. Some people have a very strong intuition. Some people are very deliberative, the blue part. They are able to think through things, plan things, kind of objectively look at things. So this is kind of subjective reaction, and this is objective thinking. Both these together are what your consciousness is doing. This is your internal brain, consciousness, mind, whatever you want to call it. This is what the yellow one is, what Daniel Kahneman calls fast thinking, and the blue one, what he calls slow thinking. Okay. Again, on the external things, there are some people who are very good at actually moving. They're very physical beings. They're able to move very well. And in a local context, they're able to do very well. Some people are able to, and that is the red function. So these are people who are kind of motivated. They're very good at actually acting things out. The green is all about planning over space and time, seeing how you interact with the economic system, the political system, the social system, and being able to do that on a large scale. That's what this is about. So both these are external. This is global and this is local. Okay. Now, So first, so how do you use this? So this is something that I learned when I was going through Principles by Ray Dalio. He's a big proponent of measuring everything. So I use a scale of 1 to 4, and I try to evaluate myself on each of these. So you can ask yourself, how good are you at intuition? How good are you at deliberate thinking? How good are you at kind of motivated action? How good are you in integrating with the economic system, economic, political, the larger world? And you'd find that if you're, if you honestly try to measure, so four would be excellent, 3 would be good, 2 would be okay, and 1 would be poor. So you can you can put it in form of numbers. You can evaluate yourself if you want. You can take the time now to ask yourself, on intuition, how good am I? You can put a number from 1 to 4. On actually acting, how good are you? From 1 to 4. In deliberation, in kind of thinking through things, correcting yourself, how good are you? From 1 to 4. And in integrating with the larger economic, political, global system, how good are you at that? Economic would be a good kind of short form of being able to kind of plan over space, time, and people. How good are you at that? And you can go ahead and kind of rate yourself on that. Now, what happens is that I think this is one use of the system, self-assessment. Having a good, just the act of putting this scale against you allows you to have a little better self-awareness of where you are. So I found that to be very useful. And with, with my friends in my meetup, whom I know really well, what we did is that 4 of us did this independently. And then we actually evaluated each other. And then we talked about it. Like, I would say that I'm, weak at something, I'm 2 at something, and 3 at something, and 4 at something. And the other person would say, no, you're not. You're actually lower than what you think you are, and or higher than what you think you are. And then I would ask, okay, why do you think that? And sometimes they would have a good reason for that. And it is good. It was very interesting. Again, there is a tremendous amount of trust and tremendous amount of honesty that is involved here. And all of us want to grow, and all of us want to help each other grow. So, and we know that it's important to actually identify, to accept your weaknesses and your strengths so that you can actually use them to live. You're not trying to pretend to be something. You're actually trying to be something. So that's it was a very interesting exercise. So for example, in some things I thought that I was weak, and I thought that I was weak for a long period of time, about 2 years. So I've been working on it relentlessly. And other people I evaluated myself at 2 on this one axis, and other people evaluated me as 4. I said, what's going on? How is it? And then I realized, because I've been working on it relentlessly, I've gotten better at it. But still in my mind, I'm saying I need to improve on it. I need to improve on it. So that was kind of, interesting feedback. It's not necessarily that, again, this is Ray Dalio's principle. You have to have believability score for everybody. You don't just take anybody's opinion. You always say, okay, how good are they at evaluating that? And the funniest part of it is that we evaluated each other. And what we found is that this one person, his assessment of everybody was radically different from their own assessment of themselves, as well as everybody else's assessment. So his assessment was completely different from, and so he looked at all of those scores, and he himself looked at his, he said, I don't really understand people, do I? So so you can get many things from doing this. with people. So assessment is one use of this. So that's use number one. The second is once you have kind of said, okay, this is where I am. The question is, so what? Okay. There are essentially two strategies you can use, two growth strategies. One is that you can double up on your strengths and build on it. And number two is you can improve on the weaknesses. Okay, those are the two things. And some combination of the two is usually good. There is no point. Sometimes what happens is that making small improvements where you're weak actually gives you an outsized advantage. Second, there is really, I mean, if you're strong at something, you ought to use it. And so that's important too. So, and you kind of have to decide what proportion you have to spend on that. On the weakness is very interesting because, like, I don't think people have. I think once you understand that you are strong at something, making the most of it, I think most people get. It's the weakness which is hardest for people to deal with. And again, Ray Dalio is wonderful here. He says there are 4 ways you can deal with weaknesses. Okay. Number one is you can evade it. Now, that's not going to help. Most people do that actually, and that doesn't help you at all because weakness continue to remain there. You just proceed as if it's there and it's actually hurting you, and you never fix it. Okay, once you say, okay, I'm going to actually acknowledge it, there are 3 strategies you can use. Previously, I used to use the strategy of trying on my own to improve on my weakness. Okay, so that's one strategy of trying to improve on your weakness. The second strategy is to work with people who are strong in that area so that together as a team, you're able to deliver a lot more than what you could do by yourself. And third strategy, if neither of these two things achieve your goals, is to structure your life so that the weakness doesn't hurt you as much. So those are the 3 strategies. And I used to usually use the first strategy of saying, trying to improve on my weakness. And what I found is that the best way to do that is to use the third strategy to start with. You start working with people who are strong where you're weak. So firstly, you get immediate benefits of teamwork. But secondly, it also sets the scale for you of what is possible. Because if you're very weak at something, you do not even know what is possible. You may think you've become twice as good, but you might have moved from 10% to 20%, and you would never know. Whereas if you are constantly in the presence of somebody who is at 80 to 90%, you know. Secondly, we learn from other people. We have tremendous capacity of learning from others. So firstly, you're working together as a team, you're achieving a lot more. Secondly, it's giving you the right scale to measure yourself on. And thirdly, it's giving you the best environment to actually improve on your weakness. So I think that strategy is a good strategy. All right, so that's on kind of the growth strategy and for yourself. Okay, so remember this. What I'm going to do is that after I'm done with this, I'm going to come to each of these slides, and so have questions. Keep your questions ready. I'll be happy to answer all the questions, but I want to just lay out how I apply this to multiple areas, and then you'll get opportunity of asking about any of these things. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one, and that is interaction with others. Okay, so now what I want you to do here, just like in the previous exercise, I wanted you to try to evaluate. Okay, let me say one thing here. Let me go back one slide on this. If you really want to do self-assessment, there is a way of doing a more extreme self-assessment, very simply, by changing the scale. Instead of saying, how good are you? You say, which is your strongest and which is your weakest? So 4 would be the strongest and 1 would be the weakest. Now, remember, all of this is relative to you, not to others. Okay, so you try to answer. So you can say which one is for which of these things you're strongest at, which of them you're weakest at, and then you answer which is the second strongest and the second weakest. That what that does is that it makes the assessment more extreme. Instead of saying, okay, I'm 2 everywhere, that doesn't give you much information. It is not actionable. But if you say that this is my weakest point and this is my strongest point, it gives you immediate to-dos. So I would recommend first measuring yourself on just how good you are on scale 1 to 4, and then actually ranking your functions. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go to interaction. Now, think of, for this, to actually use this, think of a interaction which you think is extremely positive for you. And also think of another interaction which is actually negative for you. Okay. And then try to analyze it using these 4 axes. Now, actually, there is a fifth axis here, which is the center over here, which is system, which we will come back to. All of these will apply in spades to that. Okay, but this one is easier to look at it individually. So you can look at yourself and you can say, just like you have evaluated yourself, you can evaluate the other person. Okay, so for example, many times the conflicts between people are rooted in how they approach things. Even when they are actually going in the same direction, there are conflicts that arise from the fact that one person is more intuitive, the other person is more deliberative. One person thinks everything out, and the other person has kind of intuitive feel for it, and they just expect the other person to be exactly like them and react to that other person as if they were like them. And what that does is that it causes unnecessary friction and lack of understanding. So again, this is the same kind of stuff that I was talking about, us evaluating each other in the meetup. And what you can do, like once you have done this, um, and you don't have to do it necessarily with the other person, you can do it on your own. You can say, these are my strengths, these are their strengths. And then, so that is again, that's a part of assessment. And you can look at a negative reaction and see if, some of it is rooted in the differences in their strengths versus weaknesses and yours. Similarly, you can look at people you get along with and ask yourself, what of these things that are you reacting to? What is it that you really appreciate? Things like that. So it gives you a scale to actually measure other people and the interaction. And the assessment is the first step. The growth strategies would be to say, okay, given that I see that we approach things differently, how will you actually go a little bit halfway to actually communicate with them in a way in which they would be able to grasp it better. So it's the same kind of principle applied at a interpersonal level. And all the benefits of actually working like this with other people, you can use to then work on yourself as well. So this is, interaction with others. The third place you can use it is looking at not just an individual person, but a group of persons or a system. So you can look at it, you and your family, how are you different? Or you and your business, what skills do you have in the business which are of tremendous value to the business? And what weaknesses actually hamper you in the business? What strengths the business has? Similarly, you can look at a culture. You can look at your culture. You can look at the world as a whole. I mean, look at the world and say, What is it that you have to offer to the world? Where is it that the world needs it most? And what is it that you have to offer? So it's kind of doing a mapping of saying, what are my strengths and what are the needs that are out there, in order to find some kind of a match, um, to kind of set goals. So, for example, for me, I think that deep conversation is something that is of great value. And that is something that I think I'm able to do somewhat. And that's something that I have to offer. So it's like, being able to kind of specify what exactly it is. And then there is a certain combination of skills that I have on this map that make it possible. And how do I kind of create a system which is a kind of a which is now part of the world, which is out there. This is a public system where people who want similar values can actually succeed in getting those values during these meetups. So something like that. So what is it about me, my strengths, my abilities that I can use to make this happen? So this is kind of work, kind of thinking in terms of building kind of external systems where other people can flourish, who can do certain things which otherwise would be difficult. Um, Now, this is the toughest thing to talk about, and that's principles. I think what principles are this is the center. This is the thing in the center. These are the things that bring everything together. Okay, so for me, I will just talk about one concrete principle that I have. Not concrete principle, but this is a general principle that this is one specific general principle that I have used. I learned this from Louis Sullivan. I've done a whole video on this with my friend Sherry Trasinski, who is an architect. I recommend it very highly. This is a very powerful principle. The principle is form follows function. So you always look at each of the functions, everything, to say, why is this there? What is it doing? And because what it is, how does it need to be? So you can evaluate each of these things. What is the place of intuition in human life? What is the place of action in human life? What do the structures of civilization give us? What is it? What is the role of deliberative thinking in human life? And use it in the right way, in the right structure, in right combination. So what it does is that it's a way of looking at these functions and say, are they in the right place? Are they being connected properly? Are they being engaged when they need to be engaged? Um, so it's so, and that's what principles provide. Now, for different people, it would be different principles. So the center is composed of what I call system. That would be kind of combination of purpose, plan, and principles. Something like that. I'm still trying to kind of formulate it, but it's like the ruling idea that is bringing all these things together, that is bringing your life together. Okay. So this is a quick um, way of, these are the kind of 4 applications I want to put on the table to discuss. Now I want to talk about 2 ways of kind of simplifying this, 3 ways of simplifying this. So first one is to look at it as kind of outer life and inner life. Okay, so inner life is the horizontal axis. This is our system 1 and system 2. So you can look at how they are interacting with each other, providing us. And then the external life is your kind of personal life and your larger social, economic, political life. So you can look at the red part as kind of action, your own action, and the people close to you, like friends and family kind of action. Whereas the green action is the where you fit in the rest of the society. So you can look at what is, you can look at these things in terms of kind of external versus internal. Another axis to look at, so that's a way of kind of simplifying it into two, and then you can break it up again. Another way of looking at it is this way, where you look at kind of the subjective, local, evolutionary, biological world, where we have got our bodily actions and kind of family, tribal environment, and our system one, which is our intuitive way of functioning. This is the way in which we function on the evolutionary basis. And then the objective global, where we are using writing, thinking, explicit planning, and working with people, across the world, um, on a very large scale. So that's kind of objective global functioning. It has existential part, which is the action across large space, time, and people. And it has a consciousness part, which is deliberate thinking, thinking in principles, planning, those things. And on this other side, the subjective local, it is more kind of intuitive, feeling based action. So that's another way of kind of looking at it, to what extent you are on these two axes. So it's a way of kind of simplifying instead of four. You can collapse it into two to simplify things and then expand it further. Another way of kind of simplifying it is to just think of it as a loop, that you're starting with a system, which is your plan, your purpose, plan, and principles. You're taking action based on it. The world is giving you some kind of a feedback. As a result of that, you're reacting to it, intuitively through your automatic reactions. And then you're deliberating about it to reformulate your plans and your system. So is the loop that I talked about last time. So these are some of the ways of thinking about it. Okay, so now I'm going to open it up for questions. I'll take questions on any of the slides you want. So you can. I'm happy to answer any question. Let me see how we're doing on time. Okay. All right. So we'll start with Jairo. So keep your questions short and ask a question. Don't talk about opinions at this point. You'll have plenty of time to talk about opinions during the takeaways. Okay. So Jairo, what's your question?
Yes. Hello. I was wondering uh, what you mean by intuitive versus what I think system one is mostly about instinctive, and so I see as instinctive as programmed biologically, and and so intuitive is more like a developed
Sure. Let me go ahead and answer
models
that.
or belief systems.
Sure. Let me go
So
ahead and answer that.
maybe intuitive could be on any side, either the left or the right.
Let me go ahead and answer that. Um, what system one is our automatic system. It starts out initially as purely biological. That's where we start, and we have a whole bunch of uh, you know biological kind of reflexes, things like the orienting reflex, and just many, many, many things which are automatic. And this also includes some of our kind of bodily functions as well. So those are all kind of automatic functions. Now what happens is that as beings, as mammals, and especially primates, we have got large brains. So we keep on learning many things, and those become automatic. And so there is a tremendous process of automatization that is going on. So things will come to you automatically after having learned. So sometimes you learn something. So for example, when I'm using my words, those words are coming to me intuitively. So this is my kind of unconscious or subconscious, which is providing it. So there are layers and layers of automatic functions. The base of it is biological, but then there is a whole bunch of automatized functions and habitual ways of actions that we develop. And all of that is encompassed in this yellow system one. Both the biological, it starts with the biological, but then, you know, it is our, especially for mammals, you know, we are born, for example, human beings are born with their brain only half formed, and rest of the formulation, you know, formation of brain happens during interaction with our environment, with others, and we learn things and we automatize things, even wordlessly, through imitation. And all of that is part of system one. So it's much larger. It starts with the biological base, but it gets much larger than that. Next
What
up
about
is Joe. Next,
gut feeling? What
let,
about a gut feeling?
okay, Jairo, let's go through. I'll answer all of it, but I want to take across. Gut feelings would be included with that. Gut feelings would be kind of combination of biological things uh, and automatized things. So gut feelings are, you know, it is definitely part of kind of automatized things. They draw upon all our experience, and we have a certain kind of feeling about it, and all of that is part of system one. Next up is Joe, followed by Kevin.
So I just have a brief question about the idea of the scoring system
Mm-hmm.
that you were talking about. So it sounds like it's based on half of it self-reporting, how you see yourself, and then how others see you. How do you, when you're proposing doing this, is this being done by an external group that does not know you, like, well? You mentioned that it should be somebody that knows you well, but if you wanted an objective opinion,
Yeah,
maybe you would see. So this
right.
is a, yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. I mean, there are all kinds of models, all kinds of test development over there. I've not had time to develop tests myself. The problem with it, there is all kinds of. I like tests very much, and at the same time, I'm very skeptical about tests. They give you some pieces, so I like to use kind of combination of tests that are out there, like for you know, Jungian functions. I've spent a lot of time working with Jungian functions. So the way I operate is that I take, suppose I wanted to help somebody figure out their strengths on these Jungian functions, right? So what I would do is that I would have them take firstly multiple tests, typically at different points of time, so that your current mood doesn't affect it, different test formulations don't affect it, and try to see a general kind of common pattern that comes out of the test. So that's one part. The second part is that then I have like videos and stuff which actually show what an operation of a certain kind would be like. And they can see if it is like them or unlike them. So that's like a way of, so that's another way of doing that. The
Okay.
third way of doing that would be self-reporting, of saying, does this actually, what, if you want to self-report, because you know yourself actually pretty well. So you use that, plus you get, you know, feedback from people that know you, and who would be willing to give you a honest feedback. And you have to put it, you yourself have to put it all together to say, okay, which of these makes sense? Because you have to realize that we are complex beings, and all these measurement techniques are very, you know, do not really, are not equal to the task of really getting to the heart of who we are. And so we have to be continuously aware, and at any point of time, any kind of measurement would be saying, this is the best thing that seems to be right, but always be open to the fact that, you know, there is something wrong with that. So that, you know, so having kind of healthy skepticism is necessary, because we are, you know, kind of measurement of human beings is still at a very primitive stage.
Thank
Does
you.
that make sense? Okay,
It does. Can I ask a
please
very brief
go
follow
ahead.
up? So would values then have to be the same with someone else scoring you, because that would be a way of understanding how to score the other person if you shared the value, right?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, yes and no. I think what happens is that some people are able to be objective. They would say,
Okay.
okay, even if I disagree with, see, generally what happens is that, what I found in human interaction, it's the heart, the core, the center part that really matters more than anything else. That's kind of your purpose, your principles, and what you're trying to do with life. If you have commonality at that level, you can actually work with everything else. Because what happens is that wherever you have kind of common strengths, you can work together. Where you have differences, you can do proper trade, which is just to each party. And but if you don't have that common core, then it becomes difficult. Um, Having said that, there are people who can be objective even at that level. They'll say, okay, given this, where do you stand on your intuitive ability? Where do you stand in your ability to interface with the larger global economic structure? And they would be able to make kind of objective assessment for that. And you always have to watch out for people, kind of what shall I say, having a grudge or something like that, who would kind of deliberately kind of mislead you. But you're not going to get anything from them anyway.
Thank you.
Next up is Kevin. So folks, if you have questions, just go ahead and type a exclamation mark. Kevin.
Yes, thank you. My question about the self-assessment measurement, let's use 1 to 4. It's what's like a criteria, like if I done 2 or 3 for, let's say, maybe different actual, it's not like let's say 5 kilogram, or that is very subjective, right? I would say that's like you said, we use others to help evaluate our personality or behavior.
I mean, sorry, go on, please.
Yeah, I would say just now you answer half the user system stuff, user center. If you share common value, a goal, principle, that's rest is easier. There's another last question about the one diagram you talk about subjective local, move to objective global. I would say that one very give me like good feeling. Like we start from a subjective and a local. We should open the mind or think deeper, going to objective and a deeper level to global. Am I right? Thank you.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a huge point. I mean, this is a big jump, actually. Our evolutionary heritage is operating at a subjective local level. And we are very, very good, very suited. Our brains are extremely, suited because of evolution to deal with that, in a group of 30 people whom we have known all our lives. And we can operate relatively effortlessly, very effectively in that environment. Now, fast forward in modern age, moment you move to people even more than 500, where you don't know everybody, you actually need kind of principles. You need kind of ideas that are taken for granted to be able to deal with strangers. Things that are just, so that includes laws. It includes language. So for example, at the subjective local level, most of the communication is nonverbal. Whereas at the objective global level, most of the communication is verbal and often in writing and explicit. It is, what it does is that it is a way of scaling up civilization. It is a way of coming up with systems where energies at the local level can flow in a way where they don't kind of inflict against one another, but they can work together, structures that allow them to work together cooperatively over long space, time, and across many people. So that's a huge step. So this is kind of moving from our evolutionary heritage to civilization. So that's huge. And your first point about measurement, I mean, that's a very interesting point. I mean, this is a very important point, So firstly, you need to quantify things. Quantification is important. Now, how do you go about quantifying things? Okay, so you can use it in words. So for example, you can say, okay, this is excellent, this is good, like people grade exams, right? So so any kind of human measurement of human things is not going to have the same kind of precision as measurement of the physical world. We have not learned to do that yet. Okay, we will, with the developments of neuroscience, which we are going to be talking about tomorrow, by the way. Sanjay is going to be here. It's going to be incredible. Don't miss that. But still, we have not figured out how to measure, human things well, especially human experience, the human psychology. And so what you have to do at the same time, you have to measure it. So what you do is that you develop a system. Firstly, you have to develop a system which is simple. So that's why I like either using 3-point scale or 4-point scale. Anything more than that, you think that you're measuring a lot, but actually actionable, a 4-point scale is far more actionable than a 10-point scale because it makes distinctions. And the important thing is to realize that you're doing this for achieving a goal. You're not just trying to measure for the sake of measurement. You're trying to say, what is my strongest? Where am I strongest? Where am I weakest? And iteratively, you're trying to fix your weaknesses or build on your strengths. And you're coming back and looking at it relentlessly. And reevaluating everything. And you're evaluating everything from multiple perspectives, using multiple people, and hopefully in the process, your way of measuring gets better and better as you learn from experience of saying, okay, was this really 2 or was this really 3? You'll get more precision as you go on. But it's it's much more difficult than, measuring, we are still at the kind of pre-Tycho Brahe, in the alchemy stage of trying to figure out things about human beings. At least, that's what I think. Next up is going to be Marco, followed by Jeff. Marco?
Thanks. I was wondering, like, what are ways I could develop more I think I'm weakest in the external part.
Mm-hmm.
And so what are some ways I could develop that?
Okay. Now, I don't think I can give you any particular advice. I'm not particularly strong on that myself. In general, what I found, the solution that I use is to work with people who are strong at that, people whom you can trust. So where you have the important thing is this center over here, right? Where you have kind of common purpose, common principles, and common plans. If you can find people like that, and then if they are strong where you need to be stronger and you can work with them, that's probably, I find that that's the optimum environment in order to learn. It is difficult to learn just by yourself. I don't think, I think it is much more effective working with other people as a way to do that. So that's my short answer. I don't think I have anything more to offer. I'm sorry. Next up is Jeff.
Hi, Shrikant. I want to ask this in a very simple way, even though, as you might imagine, there's sort of a lot behind it. And it relates actually to what you just said. I was very pleased you came back to this. It seems to me that there are principles that just are what they are, as if they're sort of physical, you apply fire to something and it gets hot. So there are principles in that regard. But when it comes to psychology, sociology, philosophy, it seems to me that principles are often related to purpose. And So without, I could go further with that, but I'll stop right there. Just, it just seems to me that when I'm teaching or coaching somebody regarding principles, they are related to a purpose that they have, and generally that we share.
I mean, I think that's correct. I mean, what happens is that let's put it this way. It's a very tricky question. It's a very tricky question. It's a question at what level you want to approach it. So if you say, okay, let me think how to approach this. So what we're talking about is the center here, right? Center here in this diagram. And we're saying, okay, what's the structure of the center? Okay. And clearly purpose.
Absolutely. Yes, exactly.
Okay. So what is the structure of the center? Okay, that's the question. And clearly the purpose is the starting point. So purpose you can define at a very large level as just living. And you can do it at a universal level. So there are many people who would argue that there are, that you can say, okay, you're trying to live and live as a human being. And what are the ways of doing that? And what are the general principles that arise from that? And trying to integrate that. Like, for example, Louis Sullivan does that, Aristotle does that in his own way. All philosophers do that in their own way. And that's all about kind of saying, okay, this is the purpose and these are the principles that will get there. And these are the values that you need to pursue from that. So in that sense, what is at the center is philosophy itself. And you can put that at the most general level. And philosophers are able to do that. And I certainly think that that's well worth doing. And that's universal. So I certainly think think that way. Next up is Hugo, followed by Joe.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Shrikant. I'm trying to understand better the external part of this diagram. I'm trying to apply the lesson from last Tuesday, which I get the objective, subjective, and the habitual. Is the external the part of like getting the feedback from the outside world?
Yes, exactly. So what happens is that the subjective, this is you yourself, right? And this is your ability to think. And what you're doing is that you are operating in a large world, right? You're operating in the city, you are operating in a business, and you're getting reaction from that. That structure has a certain nature. So if you, let me look at the other diagram. Let me see here. Let me go here this way. Okay. So you see the larger system. You can look at that as the external structure that is there. Okay. And you are getting the feedback along this smaller line over here, the green line. You're getting feedback from the society. The society itself is not necessarily perfect. Okay, it has its own issues. It has its own strengths. You have your own strengths. You may be doing something right. The society may be doing something wrong. You may be doing something right, and the society may be doing something right, and vice versa. Everything is possible. So you're trying to kind of objectively see what the world is, and what feedback it is giving you, and what you can do about it. And the interaction with the larger world is a part of your life. That's what, to say that there is a green part here is to say that, you live in a society. You are a global citizen. You are part of this society. And whatever you do, the society reacts, you're getting certain feedback from that. And that's integral part of your life. And you have to account for that and build on that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. Thank you, Shrikant. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Hugo. Next up is Joe.
Thank you for allowing me to ask a second question. The question I had was, it kind of builds on Jeff, and I was actually thinking about this for a while, doesn't the center require you to have a consistent and coherent philosophy of life in order for everything else to be scored correctly? Otherwise, everything would fall apart at some point. You would run into contradictions within your own life and how you're even assessing yourself. So you need a coherent philosophy of life is what I'm kind of saying.
yeah.
If in a center, right? That's
Absolutely.
like that's a principle. And if that principle doesn't exist, then the system breaks down.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. That's very well put. I could not have put it better. But let me talk a little bit more about that. I mean, the whole purpose of philosophy is to integrate your life. And it absolutely needs, and all these four things, sometimes there are violent conflict with each other. You know, your reactions, your emotions can be non-objective, can be based on something which actually is not real. And so if you have these intuitions and reactions like that, you need to engage the deliberative faculty to fix that. Similarly, you can be taking good action and there can be something wrong with the external structures. And you have to be able to kind of integrate that. So you need to have a view of life itself and opinions and about how these things ought to function together. And that is definitely, that's philosophy. And that's really kind of the heart of, kind of it is metaphysics and epistemology and ethics that is actually holding this kind of center together. So this is, philosophy at its best, trying to kind of integrate all of this. And that's why I like, and what happens is that it's not, I mean, I don't see philosophy, most people see philosophy as an academic discipline. Okay. I don't. I think it's a practical necessity, because if you don't integrate this yourself, if you don't work to integrate it relentlessly, then it's going to go haywire. It's a practical necessity of kind of holding, is a way of holding things together. That's why, my approach to the center is to try to keep simplifying it in a way in which you can use it. That's why, for example, this form follows function to me is such a powerful thing, because I can bring it to bear on anything. So what is the function of this? And it automatically says, okay, is it doing the right thing that it needs to do? And you never take whatever you have done in the past as given. You always question that, and you always go back to the purpose. Form follows function is a movement towards the center, because function is in the center. So this is what you're trying to do. And everything else, the way in which your emotions are acting or your intuitions are acting, are they supporting the function? Are they supporting your life or not? Are you doing enough deliberation to support your function or not? Are you acting enough? Are you boldly acting enough for that? Is the system that you're interacting with conducive to that, or is it destructive to it? So you're continuously evaluating each of these four spokes from the perspective of what they are doing for the center, which is your purpose. And principles are a way of kind of codifying that, of saying that this is how things need to be for them to function right. So it another way of, I did not want to, this is a little more complicated, but you brought this up. So I think of it in terms of kind of an energy equation almost. It's like you're kind of looking at how the energies are flowing. And you're saying, are they flowing right? And you're trying to do like, this is like a control mechanism for the energy. You're trying to see, is this routed right? Is this conflicting against, other energies which are just waste? What are the blockages, that don't need to be there? And what are the kind of places where the energy is leaking out? Where is it being wasted? So it's a way you can think of it as like a controlling mechanism for running an energy system of these, four things.
And you have to understand cause and effect in that, right? So that the idea of where the energy needs to be directed, what's causing the energy to be blocked within that, right? So that's my understanding. Is that correct?
Wonderful. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Next up is Paul. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, you're making me tie many of your themes of your other meetups together, as you often do with this, Srikant, and also Jeff and others, because this is my question. If you have to have a coherent sort of system of thought to use this, or else it all falls apart, and if in the past religion gave us that, are we now saying that each person needs to devise essentially their own faith, because these are going to be ideas that you end up putting your faith in, that every philosopher will be different through history. So you have to devise your own faith now that we don't have religion in order to make this coherently function.
Okay, that's a beautiful question. Okay, I'm going to answer it in detail in many ways. Okay, so let's look at kind of multiple stages. Okay, I'm saying that just as there is religion that was there, that was holding things together, there was also the state or the government that was holding things together. So it was like the king and the pope, if you will, okay, or the shaman and the chief in your evolutionary heritage, right? So there was chief who was making sure that the external structure was taken care of, and all that was needed was the obedience to the chief in order to make sure that you could eat. And there was a shaman who was keeping your psyche kind of engaged. Okay, so that was at the kind of at a tribal level. Okay, then you go forward. Then at that time, like during medieval ages, it was the king. And by the way, like most philosophers throughout history, up until the founding fathers, thought that a benevolent king is the right, it's the only proper system of government. So that their solution for the external structure was a benevolent king who would take care of everything. Okay, and corollary of that was that there was a book that would take care of everything that you needed to know at your consciousness level. So that was the pair of solutions. Now, with the progress, there are a couple of things that happened. So firstly, Martin Luther happened, where he said, why is it that we need intermediaries between me and God? Why can't an individual open his heart and find God? Why do I need the church? Why do I need chain of authority to get that? Okay, so this is one. So this is at the spiritual, intellectual level. Founding fathers did the same thing at the civilization level. They're saying, why is it that a king is needed for that? Can not we as individuals who have the right to our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness devise a system of government that protects our ability to pursue life? So if you see, both these are moving in the same direction towards more individual, moving the responsibility of shaping your consciousness and your existence in the hands of the individual and in individuals working together. This is happening at the same time as enlightenment, where people are openly talking about things that were considered not to be questioned. They were openly questioning about, what is the nature of this world? What is this world made up of? What is life? How should you live? And they thought that human mind could answer questions like that. So this entire progression is a progression of having an external solution and relying on it. Another way of looking at it, again, in terms of form follows function, was that in the olden times, people relied on form that was already established, whether it was in form of a monarchy or a church, in order to serve their functions. They did not see what is the function, what is my spiritual function, what is my soul. They did not ask that question. Or what is in my material interest, and what should I do and how should I trade with other people in order to make that happen. They did not ask that question. So it's a progression of making forms of both material forms and forms of made by conscious, whether it is concepts or conclusions or principles, moving them to the core, the prime mover, which is individual people. So in that sense, the forms become far more labile because they keep far more changeable as functions relentlessly change forms to meet them. And that is what, for example, founding fathers thought of, that the structures will keep changing. They have to be made to be responsive to the functions of individual life. So should all the thoughts be. So that is the direction in which, we have moved from our evolutionary heritage through religion to that. Now, I think religion was extremely valuable. It was the first form of philosophy. It was an implicit form of philosophy, and philosophy made things more explicit, where people could talk about everything. And then science is trying to expand on that, increasing the rigor of that. It's not fully reached as far as we would like, as far when it pertains to human beings, but it's the same direction. So Paul, does that answer the question?
Yeah, it puts a big burden on a person because you'd have to be fours on all those things to come up with a coherent thing that can be your function. And so it relates to that kind of a dilemma the modern human is in. So thank you.
No, okay, that's a very good point. I want to say that, no, you don't need to be four on each of them. You simply need to know what your strengths are and weaknesses are and be honest about it and be committed to working on them.
But I mean to come up with your own principles.
Yes, you do need to come up with your own principles as best as you can. And and this is, again, Jordan Peterson has put it very beautifully. He says, pursue your values. So corollary of that would be apply your principles. Have whatever principles formulated as best as you can, and you apply it. And in the process of application, you will get the feedback. Be open to the feedback, and you keep improving it. And so the thing is that another way of looking at it is that this is Platonism versus Aristotelianism. Platonism wants perfection now, and then you can only have the form. But this is a living process. This is a continuous process of growth. You do the best you can, and you are always open to feedback in order to do better. It does put a tremendous amount of, it is effort intensive, but but I want to stress, perfection is not necessary for it, and it is not a shame to ask for help, to kind of or to say that, look, I'm weak at this, and knowing that you're weak at it, moment you actually admit to yourself that you're weak at it, you start to improve. That's the first step of improving. It is harder, it is more effort intensive. Another way of looking at it is that if you look at just purely in terms of effort is in this blue part, the objective deliberate thinking. That is the hardest part. That's where attention is needed. Like William James' term is that the heart of will is paying attention to difficult objects. And that's what you have to be prepared to do in order to improve. And you do it to the best extent you can. And that's, your best is all you can do. But absolutely, it is a more effort intensive way of living, but the rewards are commensurate, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. All right, folks, if there are no more questions, I'm going to start the breakout rooms for 20 minutes. And let me go ahead and stop sharing here and start the breakout rooms. Welcome back. So it's time for takeaways. So let me know what you got from this. And you're welcome to ask one question. Okay. And what we'll do is that I'll collect all the questions and I'll answer all of them at the end. Okay. So I'm going to call on people as I see them in order. So it's going to be Maxine, Linda, and Jyoti first. Maxine? Maxine, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Can't you put Maxine later?
Okay, I'll put you later. I'll put you later, Maxine. Next up is Linda, Jyoti, and Dave. Linda.
I think what came out of our breakout, and perhaps it's why I was kind of confused by the whole structures. Much of the human race is working completely off of this design, or with very low values in the design.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Next up is going to be, just a second, I lost. Jyoti. Jyoti, go ahead.
So, do I have to come up with a question or takeaway?
Both. Either or both, whatever you want.
Okay, we had a very good discussion in our breakout room. And one of the things that came up was what you had said, that you had to recognize your weakness and then you have to pair yourself with a person who will bring you up. So I gave my group an example of the difference in culture, because you go to work, you come from East and you're working in the Western world. You need to know the norm. And you are, not that you're stupid, but you are unaware of a lot of deep things behind the scene things that you need to know before you make a judgment at work. So what you do is you pair up yourself with a colleague who's very aware of Western culture, and you study how that colleague is working on the judgments. Where is she coming from? Why she thought or he thought that that's how it should be. So I think in that case, for me, it happened automatically just because I'm that kind of person again. But I improved a lot. I learned about the culture, and I didn't stay enclosed in. I didn't say that, oh, I know it. But you have to stay open-minded, and you have to just go ahead and open yourself up. So that's one thing that came up. And then I said, when you are venturing into a new field, and if you are like, I'm a very intuitive person, mostly I have gone by my intuition. But if now I'm in a different field, I have to also pair up with somebody who will cross-examine my intuitions, because I can make big blunders. And that, to me, you said both the points, and I thought that they are very valid and very important in self-improvement. If you want to improve. Now, if you are a cocky kind of a person and you think you know it all, then you're going to have a big fall. You're going to fall on your nose. So that was, my takeaway is that this was very good for self-improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti. Next up is going to be Dave, Paul, and Jeff. Dave?
Thanks, Shrikant, and thank you for a very interesting discussion tonight on self-development and your 4 functions. To me, it's very situational. How you may react to a certain situation may be more emotional, more deliberative, more automatic, or more relying on traditions and structure from society. But I think it was a very useful discussion. Thanks for the time, and it was good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Next up is Paul, Jeff, and Marco. Paul?
Yeah, other than making me question whether the human race will survive, I enjoyed our breakout room. But my question on that vein, we mostly talked about the center of the circle. And is it necessary, now that we're more than 30 people in our little group of, the past million years ago, to have every person or group in the world that has power share a common set of principles for us to survive as a human race? And if that's not possible, which we kind of thought maybe not in our group, maybe there's a different word, rules, kind of like the way you run these meetups. You don't need a common principle, you need a common set of rules. So I'd like your comments on that.
Wonderful.
What do you think of that?
Excellent, excellent. Thank you, Paul. We'll get to that for sure. Next up is Jeff, Marco, and Joe. Jeff?
So Paul and I were in the same group, and one of the things I shared was at the end there was that Shrikant, I once took a 6-week graduate level class on ethics, where there were about 12, 14 people in the group, and our final exam at the end was that each one of us, after learning about these different structured approaches to ethics and the components and the trade-offs and all that, had to actually present our own system and structure for what was ethical. And we split up into 3 different groups, and we were responsible for candidly critiquing each other. And we realized after we were done with about the first two people in each pod, that none of us was going to be able to do it. Not a single one of us was going to be able to present something that could survive logic, and that every one of our systems had depended on us taking something by faith, and then the logic was built as a build out, was a reasoned build out from whatever we took by faith. So like the divinity, the spark of divinity in every person, or that life had some particular purpose to it. We were taking that by faith, and that was our only defense. And the rest was whether or not we had correctly used reason to build it out. So the professor knew that this was going to happen. He taught this class before, and he passed all of us, which was great. And he explained to us that the primary reason for the class was to increase humility. And but it was all about purpose and principles and defensible build out of rules, reason, ultimately justifying law, whatever that might be.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Next up is Marco, Joe, and Mike. Marco.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be looking for these the principles more in my own life, and sort of seeing them throughout the day, and also looking for them in other people as well. So
Thank you. Thank you, Marco. Next up is Joe, Mike, and Hugo.
So thank you again for presenting this. And I was in a, as Jody had mentioned, we were in the same breakout room together, and the idea of cultures and value systems and how that perverts the feedback loop of being able to analyze each other. I think that that's very significant on a number of levels. So I looked at it as, I used an example of an accounting firm. You know, if you have different principles that you're applying, then you're going to come out with different answers and be unable to really analyze each other. So your values will be completely different. So the need to at least maybe not have the same values, but to understand the values is a critical part of this. The other question is the one that I have had for, it's been burning for quite a while, that Paul just asked, was the idea distinction between the rules and principles. Because I look at principles, and this is why it's so hard to state principles, because principles can't change, whereas rules can. And making that distinction is really important, because principles are rules stated very simply, but they can't be refuted. Whereas rules, again, and I use the example of traffic, you can have principles of a traffic system, but you have rules that you can change. You know, you're not going to have the same speed limits that you would have in the turn of the century. You would have 60-mile-an-hour speed limits, 70-mile-an-hour. So rules can be changed and the system can be improved, but the principle of the systems can't be. And I found that to be a really important, that's something I've struggled with, because I haven't been able to state principles, simply. So that's my question, is that how do you really distinguish between rules and principles clearly, so that we can, get to another level of understanding?
Excellent. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Mike, Hugo, and Kevin. Mike, I'll give you 3 minutes, or
Well,
4 if you want.
Okay, I think we're converging on a good solution, on a general solution. I can see that this is applicable to some of the structures that you've talked about real well. I don't think we're at a general solution yet. In some respects, this is you've addressed this problem with 2 different graphics before, and this is better for the process that we've talked about today. There's principles, there's rules, and there's values. And I think all 3 of them are situationally dependent. And I think we're converging on a general solution. I don't know that we're there, and I don't know myself how to get there. I'm following your path to see how we're getting there, and I don't have the answer yet. But thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate that. Next up is going to be Hugo, Jairo, and Kevin. Hugo?
Yeah, thank you, Shrikant. Yeah, great presentation tonight. And yeah, my question is similar to what Joe and Mike talked about, is, the relationship between the values and principle, and also what Joe mentioned about, the importance of making the distinction between rules and principle, which I found really insightful there. And yeah, so I'm kind of like in that area, trying to explore and understand better all these different notions of values and principles and rules.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Hugo. We'll definitely talk about this. Next up is going to be Jairo, Kevin, and Laura. Jairo?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, so in the center, there's form follows function. So I didn't catch how you define it, but I'm guessing that, like, for the example of that I wrote in the chat was that I was think that maybe I could equate form as an example would be like religious rituals could be a form, and the function or what it comes out of is would be the system of ethics in that religion or the philosophy behind it.
Mhm.
And maybe other examples could be taken.
Sorry, your audio went in and out, but I got your question.
Okay,
I will
my bad.
definitely address it.
Oh, I put it in the chat, but basically of like religious rituals could be the form, and in the system of ethics of that religion could be the function, right?
Got it. Let me, yes, I'll definitely address that. Thank you. Next
you.
up is Kevin and Maxine. Kevin. Okay, next.
Can I do later?
Oh,
Yeah,
sure.
sorry.
Maxine, go ahead.
Okay. This is grueling. And so how do we keep it from how do we keep it from overtaking the rest of our life? Because it is grueling. How do we have even time to do an evaluation of our progress? Try to do it at the end of the day in a journal, but there is so much to take in. You said to find someone who you can possibly mentor you, but do you let them know that they are being watched, or that you are gaining, or do we do this secretively? I mean, because possibly the person that you would want to mentor you wouldn't want to do that. I mean, usually if somebody is much better at something than you are, they're looking to better themselves, not better you. So how do we deal with that? And those are my questions. And now, do you want to take away?
Yes, please.
Yeah, okay. Well, I am working at this. Last week I skipped. I didn't do this. And I thought, oh no, I'm not going to skip again. I'm going to work at this. So I did, and I worked at it all week, and then I am here today, and I'm thinking, do I have the strength to work at this all week this week? Because I find that the diagrams this week are easier than the ones last week. Okay, but I need them a little easier. Could you make them?
Okay.
All right.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Maxine. Next up is going to be, let's see, Laura and Kevin, and then we will answer the questions. Laura, go ahead.
Okay, I have to tell you, my brain is like on overcharge. I am stuffed in my head and I can't think anymore.
Okay.
I need like 2 weeks of like processing time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that. Next up is Kevin.
Hey, thank you. Put everything together.
Oh, sorry, Kevin. You need to unmute yourself again. I muted you by mistake. Go ahead.
Too louder for you. Okay.
No. I made a mistake. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's good effort. You know, on our breakout room, we talk about how people normally don't have time look at this. Then I would say this. It's about self improvement and self conscious, like meta self awareness about yourself. When you got time, you think about it's a useful tools at least. Normally we don't need to stay on yourself over there. You think big picture. It's for long run and to better understand your relationship with others a family, friends, the organization, and the world. And from different perspective, compare your system to other system. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin. All right, so I'm going to try to, I don't know if I missed anybody, just go ahead and type exclamation mark. Okay, so I'm going to address this. So firstly, I'm going to take, let me start with Maxine's point. What happens is that you always have strengths and weaknesses. And what you do is that you trade your strengths with people who will help you with your weaknesses. So you always have strengths. And so you do not offer them your weakness, you actually offer them your strength. And so you're working together as a team where you may be really, really good at something. And that's what you offer them. So you're not going to them with a begging bowl. You're going to them with a trade. And you find a person, you cannot do this with everybody, but you work out kind of a win-win interaction between people, because there are so many people around, and you just have to find a interaction which is win-win, and that's very important, because that's the context in which you're going to get the most. Both parties are going to get the most. So that's how I would answer that. Now, in terms of Hyro's question about religion, oh yes, that's absolutely true. What happens is that any kind of system produces artifacts or rituals, which are forms, in order to capture the function that it is trying to solve. And unfortunately, so there is a real function that these religions have. And they produce rituals to embody that. Usually when it is first produced, those rituals or those artifacts actually capture the function really well. Unfortunately, most people then grab onto those rituals or the artifacts and use them almost as end in itself, and end up losing the connection with the function that they were meant to serve. So over time, they become ritualistic, they become ossified, they lose the connection with this living energy. And this happens not only for religion, it happens for philosophies, it happens in economies, it happens for products, it happens for everything. And that is the idea of form follows function, that it's the function that creates the form. And moment you kind of grab onto the form and say, all I'm going to do, I now have the form, I don't have to worry about anything else, it begins to die, because it's a living thing and it needs to be continuously kept alive, continuously regenerated by a living function for it to be effective. And this is true of everything. And that's why this principle of form follows function is profound. Does that answer the question, Hyro? Okay. Okay, so now to the question of principles and rules. The way in which it works is that, I mean, take America, okay? It was Jefferson who identified the principles, which are there in Declaration of Independence. Principle of what they were trying to build in America. And then it was people like Madison who actually worked out a system that implemented that. So what the principle is a universal truth. It is pointing to a universal truth that is true of human beings. Rules are kind of heuristic, which are a way of implementing those principles. And this, so it's not, so it's principles themselves are not sufficient. You have to convert them into rules. So suppose you say form follows function, you have to have a rule that you're going to reevaluate this often. So for example, this that you're going to reevaluate how you are spending your time every week. Now that's a rule. The function is to keep your, so this is a difference between that rule is kind of fungible. It is not like you can't say I will do this once in 10 years. That would not be right. And you can't say that you can do it every second. That won't be right either. But whether it is once a day, twice a week, or once in 2 weeks, that's variable. And so you play around with the heuristics of that to match whether your principle is being satisfied. This is particularly true when it deals with other people. So, like, for example, the Constitution has principles, the principles are there in Declaration of Independence. Constitution is mostly rules to implement those principles. Saying that these are the rights, those are principles. Again, how do you implement that? Are rules. Even the way in which it is done in the government is a good example. Legislature passes the laws, and then the administrators pass regulations or rules to implement those legislations. Legislation sets the direction, and then something else has to be done on the top of that. So that's, I think, is the relationship between principles and rules. Joe?
So that's a perfect, now I actually am starting to get it. And so thank you very much for that. Just very clear explanation. So I just want one quick question. Does a principle, not a principle, does a habit correlate with a rule? So it's like a shortcut. It's a mental, is that a way of thinking about a rule in general? Is so the instinctual part of our brains are essentially our rules, and then our principles come from our system two. Is that a way?
That's very interesting. I think of rules as being part of system two. Habits are basically just patterns of actions which, if done right, are in consonant with those rules. So it's like system one is not actually looking at rules explicitly, because but if it is trained right, then it is functioning as per the rules.
Okay, that makes perfect. Yeah. So there's
right.
So if I have it, it's like principles, purpose, and then actions would be underneath that. Purpose would be on top of that. So then I understand the interaction would be between purpose and action, and that's where you're talking.
Sure. So the way I would say is, so there is principles, and rules are implementing those principles of specific patterns of actions, heuristics that are doing that. Then habits actually are actual actions which are kind of automatized, and if done right, they are in either, they're in consonant with rules. So if you're implementing those rules over a period of time, it will be habits. So those are at that. So it's like principles, rules, habits.
Thank you. That cleared up everything. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Paul.
Thanks. Unlike being cleared up by that, I have the opposite. I'm back to being horrified at the future of human civilization. So
why are you horrified at the future of the human
civilization? I'll explain very briefly.
Yes.
So, and just to apply a system to the system, we talked briefly, I mentioned Immanuel Kant in the thing, because the categorical imperative says, act as if your way of acting, if everyone did that, things would be better. Just to say, my point is, if we universalize your idea, and if Jeff is right that there can't be a single set of ethics, which I would call that guiding center, that everyone can agree upon without acts of faith. And if I was hoping we'd be saved by, well, you can make rules, but now you're saying rules follow the principles. So how do world bodies come together all over the world with a common way of thinking that will allow us to work together as a species?
Okay, so this is very interesting. So let's talk about that. Also, let's relate it to the other things we were talking about, different cultures and value systems, importance of understanding others' values, that I think Jyoti talked about and Joe talked about. I think you had brought up the issue of the questions of, what are the common principles, that how do you kind of develop common principles? So firstly, um, in spite of all of this, human beings have muddled along pretty well. Okay, it's been quite messy, and um, most people expect a top-down solution, and I don't think that's how things work. What you have to do is you have to do your best to devise a system which is, and each of us does that, to devise a system that you think is conducive to good human interaction. And you do that at every level you can, as best as you can. You're always limited. You deal with people. Each of us is doing so. Now look at it. This is again a fundamental difference between the way in which the American system, the founding fathers thought, and how the Europeans thought, or rest of the world actually, up until then thought. Most people thought that really, if you want an ideal system, it has to be top down, that everybody has to get it, otherwise it's useless. Founding fathers actually never thought like that. They thought they're saying that the prime mover is with individual people. And it is the process of individual people relentlessly trying to come up with systems that work and then working together. Like you have these colonies, right? New England is very different from Virginia. They're very suspicious of each other. Okay. Pennsylvania is completely different. Kentucky, everybody hates at that point. They can't really figure them out. All of them are very different. But at the same time, there is something common to each of them, and they have common interest. So they find a common things that people can agree on. They fought like cats to say, that the Pennsylvanians, in honor of people from Philadelphia, it was the Quakers who settled in that area. And for them, religious liberty was critical. They would not live without religious liberty. New Englanders did not care about religious liberty, but they had to, Quakers fought for religious liberty, and that became part of the Constitution. The New Englanders cared about freedom of association, which the people from Kentucky would care about less. They were all about being out in the wild and leave me alone. They're not really about, kind of freedom of association, which was critical for New Englanders. So they fought for that. And as a result, the Virginians fought for their property rights. The Kentuckians fought for leave us alone. And all of those values got built into the Constitution. So the Constitution ended up having more freedoms than any of these colonies or any other place in the world had, because there were different groups of people who had to negotiate with each other a workable compromise. And so that's why America became what it was, through this interaction. That is the pattern that I expect. What is happening now is that, we are being connected, just like these colonies, these people who had actually came from very different backgrounds. New Englanders came from cities. The Virginians came mostly from agrarian areas. The Kentuckians came from the boonies in Scotland and Ireland at that time. They're very different people. They had different mores. They had different ways of thinking, but they knew that they had to work together to do something, and they produced America. That is the pattern that I see. And that is why I'm actually optimistic about it. It's going to be messy. If you think messy is bad, you're going to think it's bad. But for the first time, we are in actual contact with a wider set of cultures and points of view than we have ever been. You know, the West is talking to China, the China is talking to India, India is talking to the West. There is a tremendous exchange going on, learning some things from each other, maybe not too much, but something. And so that's why I think, and that's the pattern that I see of it's kind of negotiated, it is done on a person by person, culture by culture basis, and it grows, and slowly kind of common things emerge from that in a slow way. Right, Laura, you have a question or comment? You need to unmute yourself.
All right, look at America today, though. I mean, how do you apply that model to us internally with our differences? We're not doing such a good job about.
Absolutely. That's a good point. I mean, I generally don't talk about politics, current politics, because it is very difficult to do that. But I'll give you an example of the 2 meetups that we did on the topic. There were people with very different views, and we were at least able to talk about this. I mean, we did a whole meetup on, from the many one. And that was exactly about this. And so it can be done. And the question of scaling it up, I think the differences are far more deeper than people think. And both sides are really not understanding the other side. And you have to realize that half the people in America can't be monsters. If you think that, and many people from both sides think that, okay, you have to understand where they are coming from, where the other party is coming from. And that's what, inevitably has to happen for us to do that. It will take a while. It will take a while. But it's well worth it. All right, folks, this was very helpful. Let me just recap everything here. So Linda was saying that the level of human beings is quite low on an average. I don't think that is actually true. It's just that there are a lot of people. There are 8 billion people now. When we look at the past, we are talking about just few people who stand out. And so in terms of proportion of people, and also the fact that the literacy is as widespread, everybody's connected to one another. The actual raw number of great people out there is quite astonishing. And their influence is quite more than what people think. The idea of pairing up that Jyoti talked about, I think is very, very deep, but I would extend it to not just pairing up, but looking at having many interactions and trying to learn from each other. That's one thing. I'm a city guy. I'm from Bombay. I like people. I'm very comfortable talking to people. I live in New York. I talk to anybody I can find wherever and you have a lot to learn from people, and that's what we're doing over here. So I think that's a continuing process, and each person can teach you some things that you don't expect. So I think that's huge. Saying that it was situational, absolutely. All of these are situational. There are contexts in which you can be very intuitive, and in other contexts you are not. And some in places where you can deliberate really well, there are places where you're able to act well and not. And those are the patterns you have to observe too. So it's kind of like thinking of yourself as almost different personalities operating in different roles. And the same thing applies. So not only you as a whole, but you in a particular context that makes you operate. So absolutely, you have to evaluate that. And it's the same principle applied at situational levels. So it actually works very well there. Let's see what else. Understanding the values of other people, I think that's very important. And I agree that somebody said that most of the discussion was about the center. That's what really matters, because that's what kind of brings things together and integrates things together. That's the hardest part. And so I look forward to expanding on that quite a bit. I'm quite encouraged that I was trying to address kind of the general pattern. I hear everything and I try to respond to the most common themes. The most common theme was how to apply it. It at least looked like everybody was trying to apply it to something or the other. So that succeeded. And I think a couple of people, including Mike and Maxine, said that this was little better, little easier to follow than before. And I will continue to kind of push along that lines. And Mike says that we are converging to general solution. We are converging, but not fast enough for me. And so I'm going to keep working at it. It's, I think, a long way to go. But Paul, you had something. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be brief because I've spoken a lot. Less than a minute.
Go ahead.
You actually gave me some faith, Shrikant. You were very eloquent then. And my point is, I wonder if Jeff's philosophy professor would maybe agree that people could take on faith one sentence only. And that's what the founding Americans thought. We have to cooperate to survive. And maybe with that one principle, only that, it would be possible to get all world bodies to agree to that. And then a set of rules would flow from it. And maybe the human species will survive. And you can still follow all the structure that you talked about with that one idea. We have to cooperate to survive.
It is true it's a great idea, but I don't think it flows from an idea to the world body and then down. It has to flow kind of, it's a bottom up process. And it's the world bodies can say that if there is a general agreement from the bottom. So it's a bottom up process.
I agree, but that we have to come up with something that's possible to get the 70 million, the other 70 million, the other 10 billion to buy into. That's hard, as Jeff pointed out.
I mean, look.
If there's not one common thing, your system falls apart for survival, I believe, but maybe it's too big a topic to end.
No, Paul, look at what has happened to the world. Look at what has happened to the world. I mean, I recommend if you go to, there is a website called gapminder.org, okay, which run by one of the greatest, my favorite statisticians. What he has done is that he has put together all the statistics that all the governments in the world have about everything. And he has presented it visually. And it's a stunning story. It's a stunning story. Things are actually much, much better than what people think. You look at places like Bangladesh, you can just see what is happening to the world in terms of longevity, just across the board. So things are actually much better than what people think. Yeah, that's the one, Kevin. It's just spectacular presentation of all the data on everything that we have data on in a form which is very easy to follow and see. So what you do is that you run these statistics over time across all the countries, and you see the progress, and it is quite stunning. So I would start with that. I think that is the most hopeful thing, actually seeing the data of what is out there. All right, so folks, on that note, I will say good night. It has been an honor. I really appreciate all the feedback, and to be continued. Good night, everybody.